Let's dive into the root of fear in a way that connects deeply with your experience. Think about this. As long as you focus on eliminating fear, it will cling to you. Why? Because the very act of trying to destroy fear stems from fear itself. You don't just dislike fear, you're scared of it. That's why you want it gone. But fear doesn't work like that. It's not something you can erase by force. Fear is tied to your ego. It's a shadow of it. Let's break it down. You know death is inevitable. Every day, someone somewhere dies. And deep down, you know your time will come too. Each funeral you hear about is a reminder that someday it will be yours. Isn't that a chilling thought? The uncertainty of when makes it even scarier. Death is the one certainty in life. Everything else is unpredictable, but death, it's a guarantee. No wonder fear grips us. Now think about how we see ourselves. If you believe you are just your body, fear becomes natural. The body will age, weaken, and eventually stop functioning. Fear arises from this impermanence. The same goes for the mind. Have you noticed how unstable it is? One moment you're happy, the next you're angry. Your thoughts and emotions keep shifting like waves on the ocean. If you identify with this ever-changing mind, fear becomes unavoidable. So, what's the way out? It's not about fighting fear, but understanding it. Sit with it. Observe it. Ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? If it's death, remind yourself that the body and mind are temporary. The fear diminishes when you stop seeing yourself as just the body or mind. There's a story about Socrates that's worth remembering. When he was about to die, a disciple asked him if he was scared. Socrates replied with clarity, "There are only two possibilities. Either death is the end, just like falling into a deep, dreamless sleep, or it's a transition to another form of existence. If it's the end, why fear it? You didn't exist before birth, and you weren't troubled then. If it's a transition, why fear that either? Life will continue in a new way. Either way, fear is pointless." This idea echoes in the story of a wise man whose two sons died. When his wife broke the news, she framed it as returning something borrowed. If someone lends us diamonds and later asks for them back, should we refuse? She asked. The wise man agreed, understanding that life, like those diamonds, is a temporary gift. He let go of his sorrow, accepting that what wasn't his to keep had returned to its source. So, when fear arises, don't fight it. Sit with it, understand its source, and let it teach you. Fear loses its power when you realize you're more than the body, more than the mind. You're the observer beyond these fleeting experiences. When you embrace that, fear becomes nothing more than a shadow, one that fades in the light of understanding. Let me ask you something. How do you deal with fear? Do you push it away, distract yourself, or try to convince yourself it doesn't exist? Most of us do. We resist fear because we hate the way it makes us feel. Vulnerable, uncertain, powerless. But here's the truth. The more you resist fear, the stronger it becomes. It's like quicksand. The harder you fight, the deeper you sink. Fear feeds on resistance. As long as you focus on getting rid of it, you give it power. Think about a moment in your life when you were terrified. Maybe a big exam, a job interview, or a difficult conversation you were avoiding. You kept telling yourself, "I shouldn't feel this way," or "I have to get over this." But did that help? Probably not. Fear doesn't go away just because we want it to. Instead, it lingers in the background, waiting for its chance to resurface. Here's an alternative. What if you stopped fighting fear? Imagine standing in a dark room. You can't see what's in front of you, so naturally, you feel afraid. Now, instead of running or fumbling in the dark, you turn on a light. Suddenly, the room doesn't seem so scary anymore. That's what happens when you stop resisting fear and instead acknowledge it. When you allow yourself to feel fear, to sit with it, you shine a light on it. You start to understand it, and in understanding, you begin to dissolve its power. But where does this fear come from? More often than not, It's tied to something we're deeply attached to. Fear is rooted in attachment. We fear losing things we love: our health, our family, our possessions, our image. For instance, why are we so afraid of failure? It's not the failure itself, but what it represents: the loss of approval, status, or self-worth. If we weren't so attached to these things, failure wouldn't hold such power over us. Let's take a practical example. Have you ever hesitated to try something new because you were afraid of what others might think? Maybe you didn't apply for that dream job or share an idea in a meeting because you feared judgment. That fear doesn't come from the action itself. It comes from your attachment to how others perceive you. If you let go of that attachment, the fear would fade. Now let's talk about the ultimate source of fear: death. Every fear we have, at its core, ties back to this inevitability. We fear the loss of life, of loved ones, of what we've built. Death feels like the ultimate loss, and it's terrifying because it's certain. We see it all around us: news of accidents, illnesses, or old age. And we're reminded that no one escapes it. But here's the irony: the certainty of death can also set you free. Think about it. If you know for sure that something is going to happen, why fear it? Isn't fear rooted in the unknown? Instead of fearing death, we can learn to accept it as a natural part of life. When we do, we stop wasting energy trying to avoid it and start focusing on living fully. Imagine a person who knows they have only 6 months to live. Suddenly, they stop caring about trivial things. They don't waste time on meaningless arguments or chase after things that don't matter. They focus on what's truly important: spending time with loved ones, pursuing passions, and leaving a positive impact. When you embrace the certainty of death, you start living with purpose. So, let's bring this home. The first step to overcoming fear is to stop resisting it. Instead of running away, face it head on. Ask yourself, why am I afraid? Is it because you're attached to something? An outcome, a person, or a possession? Recognize that attachment, and you'll start to see the fear for what it really is: a shadow, not a monster. And finally, remember that death isn't the enemy. It's a teacher reminding us to value the time we have and to live meaningfully. The next time fear grips you, don't push it away. Sit with it, understand it, and let it guide you to a deeper truth. Because in understanding fear, you don't just conquer it, you transform it into wisdom and courage. So I ask you, what will you do the next time fear knocks on your door? Will you resist it, or will you invite it in and let it teach you? The choice is yours. Have you ever wondered why fear feels so overwhelming? It's because we believe it's tied to our very survival. When we feel fear, it's often because we think something fundamental to who we are is at risk. Our body, our thoughts, or even our sense of self. But here's the thing. Fear only has power over you if you believe you are the things it threatens. What if you're not? Let's start with the body. We often associate ourselves so strongly with our physical form that any harm to it feels like harm to our very existence. Fear of illness, aging, or injury stems from this belief. But look closer. Your body is constantly changing. The cells in your body regenerate, your appearance evolves, and your physical abilities shift over time. You're not the same physically as you were 10 years ago, yet you still feel like you. So, if the body changes and you remain, can you truly be just the body? Think about how fear plays into this. For example, why do we fear public speaking? Is it the act of speaking that scares us? Not really. It's the fear of rejection, embarrassment, or failure, things we think could harm us. But none of those fears can touch the essence of who you are. They might bruise your ego, but they don't harm you. Now let's talk about the mind. Have you noticed how unstable your thoughts and emotions can be? One moment you're calm, and the next, you're angry. One day you're motivated, and the next, you're full of doubt. The mind is like a river. It's always moving, always changing. Yet, we often mistake this flow of thoughts for our identity. We say, I am happy or I am sad, as though these passing states define us. But here's a simple truth. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. Imagine watching a movie. The scenes might make you laugh, cry, or feel scared, but you know you're not in the movie. You're just watching it. The same is true for your mind. When you realize this, the fear that comes from unstable thoughts starts to lose its grip. This brings us to the ego. The ego is that voice in your head that says, I am this, or I need that. It's the part of you that clings to identities, possessions, and achievements. Fear is the ego's shadow. When the ego feels threatened, whether by criticism, loss, or failure, fear takes over. Here's a practical example. Imagine someone criticizes your work. Why does it sting so much? It's not the words themselves. It's the ego saying, this attack threatens who I am. But if you didn't see yourself as your work, the criticism wouldn't carry the same weight. The ego's need for validation creates fear. And by letting go of that need, you can let go of the fear too. So, how do we move beyond this? First, understand that the body, the mind, and the ego are not you. They are tools you use, not the essence of who you are. Fear arises when you identify too strongly with these tools. When fear about the body arises, remind yourself that the body is temporary. Take care of it, but don't let it define you. When your thoughts create fear, step back and observe them. See them as clouds passing across the sky. Not permanent, not you. And when the ego feels threatened, question its assumptions. Ask yourself, does this really define me? Meditation is a powerful way to practice this. The next time fear strikes, sit quietly and focus on it. Observe where it comes from. Is it tied to your body, your mind, or your ego? As you identify its source, you'll realize something profound. Fear is just a reaction. It's not an unchangeable truth. When you stop seeing yourself as the body, the mind, or the ego, fear begins to fade. You understand that what you truly are, the awareness behind it all, cannot be harmed. This is liberation. So, the next time fear arises, don't push it away. Don't fight it. Instead, ask, what part of me feels threatened? Then remind yourself, I am not my body, I am not my mind, and I am not my ego. You are something far greater, and that realization is the beginning of true freedom from fear. Think about your deepest fears. Are they connected to things you hold close? Your family, career, possessions, or reputation? Fear is deeply rooted in attachment. We cling to what we have, fearing its loss, and this attachment chains us to anxiety. But what if we could let go of these chains? What if we could see attachment for what it really is, a source of unnecessary suffering? Let's explore this idea. Imagine you're holding a glass in your hand. If you grip it tightly, your hand starts to hurt. And if someone tries to take it, you resist, fearing it will break or be lost. But if you hold it loosely, you can appreciate it without pain or fear. Attachment is like that tight grip. It creates tension, fear, and ultimately suffering. Why do we attach ourselves to things? It's because we believe they define us or give us security. A successful career might make you feel important. A loving relationship might give you a sense of belonging. A nice house or car might symbolize status. But the problem is, none of these things are permanent. The more you cling to them, the more you fear losing them. Consider a practical example. Suppose you're in a relationship and you start fearing that your partner might leave. Instead of enjoying the connection, you become consumed by anxiety. You start acting out of fear, trying to control them, seeking constant reassurance, or doubting their love. What happens? The relationship suffers because fear has taken over. Or think about your career. You might be so attached to your job title or success that the thought of failure terrifies you. You overwork, stress, and lose sleep because you're afraid of losing that identity. But if you weren't so attached to it, you'd approach work with less fear and more joy. knowing that your worth doesn't depend on external achievements. The truth is, attachment creates fear because it ties your sense of self to something external. When you say, "I am my job," or "I am my possessions," or "I am my relationships," you give those things power over you. But here's the good news. You can break free. How? By practicing detachment, not in the sense of rejecting or avoiding things, but in letting go of the need to control or own them. Detachment doesn't mean you stop loving or caring. It means you love and care without clinging. You appreciate what you have without fearing its loss. Let me share a story to illustrate this. There was a wise man who lived in a small house with very few possessions. One day, a thief broke in. Instead of getting angry, the wise man said, "You can take whatever you like, but I hope you find what you truly need." The thief was so moved by the man's calmness and lack of fear that he left empty-handed. The man wasn't attached to his belongings, so the thief had no power over him. Now think about this in your life. What are you afraid of losing? Your job, your relationships, your possessions? Ask yourself, am I attached to these things because I think they define me? If the answer is yes, remind yourself that you are more than your attachments. Meditation and mindfulness can help here. When fear arises, sit quietly and reflect on what you're afraid to lose. Ask yourself, why am I clinging to this? What would happen if I let go? You'll often find that the fear loses its grip when you detach from the idea that your happiness or identity depends on that thing. Detachment leads to freedom. It allows you to enjoy life without fear, to love without clinging, and to work without being consumed by stress. It's not about giving up what you have. It's about giving up the fear of losing it. So, the next time fear strikes, don't let it control you. Look at it as a signal, a sign that you're too attached to something. Then loosen your grip. Appreciate what you have, but don't let it define you. Because when you let go of attachment, you let go of fear, and in that space, you discover true freedom. Now let me ask you this. What attachments in your life are holding you back? And more importantly, are you ready to let them go? The choice is yours, and in making it, you take the first step toward a life free from fear. Let's confront one of the deepest fears that nearly everyone carries, the fear of death. It's a fear that lurks in the background of our lives, influencing our choices, shaping our attachments, and driving our need for security. But what if I told you that understanding and accepting the reality of death is the key to living a fearless and meaningful life? Start by asking yourself, why do we fear death? Is it the pain we associate with dying, or is it the idea of no longer existing? For many, it's the uncertainty, the not knowing what comes next. But here's the paradox. Death is the most certain thing in life. Everything else, success, relationships, possessions, is uncertain. Yet we fear death the most. This fear arises because we avoid thinking about it. In our culture, we push conversations about death to the side. We hide it behind rituals, euphemisms, and distractions. But ignoring death doesn't make it go away. It only makes the fear grow stronger. Imagine being afraid of an exam you've never studied for. The more you avoid it, the bigger it seems in your mind. Facing death works the same way. Think about it practically. Every day, life reminds us of death. The seasons change, the leaves fall, and the cycle continues. We see people age, we lose loved ones, and yet we cling to the illusion that death won't touch us. But what if, instead of fearing death, we embraced it as a natural part of existence? Let's consider a story. Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers, was sentenced to death for his teachings. As he faced his execution, his disciples asked if he was afraid. Socrates calmly replied that death is either like a deep sleep, where you feel nothing, or a transition to another state of being. In either case, he said, there's no reason to fear. If death is like sleep, then there's peace. And if it's a journey, then there's discovery. This perspective invites us to rethink death, not as an end, but as a transformation. When we accept that death is inevitable, we stop fearing it. And when the fear of death fades, so does the grip of fear in other areas of life. Why? Because much of our fear, whether it's about failure, rejection, or loss, stems from the fear of losing something we associate with life. Let's bring this closer to home. Think about the decisions you've made out of fear. Perhaps you stayed in a job you didn't love because you feared financial instability. Or maybe you avoided pursuing a dream because you feared failure. These fears are rooted in a desire to preserve what we think gives life meaning. But when you accept the certainty of death, you realize something profound. Life's meaning isn't in holding on, it's in fully living. Now, how do we use this understanding in daily life? Start by meditating on death, not as a morbid exercise, but as a way to deepen your appreciation for life. Reflect on the fact that each moment is fleeting, and that this impermanence gives life its beauty. When you acknowledge that time is limited, you begin to focus on what truly matters: love, kindness, growth, and purpose. Another practice is to confront your smaller fears. Fear of speaking up, fear of change, fear of rejection. These are all shadows of the ultimate fear of death. When you face these fears, you strengthen your ability to face the bigger fear. Take small steps every day. Speak your truth even when it's uncomfortable. Take a risk even when failure is possible. With each step, you'll find that fear loses its power. Finally, embrace gratitude. The fact that we're alive right now is a miracle. Instead of fearing what we might lose, celebrate what we have. Gratitude shifts your focus from scarcity to abundance, from fear to joy. To conclude, remember this: death is not an enemy. It's a teacher. It reminds us of life's preciousness and urges us to live fully, not fearfully. So when fear arises, ask yourself, what am I truly afraid of? And how can I use this fear to live more courageously? The journey to overcoming fear begins with understanding, and understanding starts with acceptance. Accept death as a natural part of life, and you'll discover that fear no longer controls you. Instead, you'll find freedom, purpose, and the courage to embrace life in all its fullness. Thank you.